but they literally opened up the border and allowed every illegal person that they can possibly find to allow them to come into our country, to flood our cities so they can win elections forever.
Are we in some sort of immigrant emergency here in America? No, the number of immigrants are going down, not up.
Ultimately, this is a cultural problem. When you have people coming from certain places where, let's be honest, women are considered second-class citizens, if not cattle.
I think this idea that your sort of culture, your national identity, can potentially be diluted by people of a different skin tone or indeed religious background is a pretty pathetic argument.
So people who believe in Sharia law, do they believe in civil liberty?
Konstantin, you keep asking me the same question. I'm going to keep giving you the same answer.
Should we deport people who want Sharia law?
This debate went off the rails the moment the topic of migration shifted from numbers to emotions. People are getting nervous, politicians are getting louder, and the truth is getting harder to find. 4 completely different worldviews sat at one table, with zero patience. And everyone claimed to speak for the real people. So let's see who's actually being honest here, and who's just performing for the cameras.
Look, it's a natural thing that happens that, number one, people are used to their way of life, and when things change a little bit, they get discomforted by it. So I understand it. It's a natural reaction. And at the same time, especially when your government doesn't deliver for you, as is happening in both Turkey and the UK and America, people get frustrated and go, why doesn't anybody, our government, ever represent us? And now we've got these new folks in, and they might be getting a nickel and a dime, but it's a nickel and a dime more than I'm getting. So that's why that frustration happens, and I understand. And I'm an immigrant, and what I would say to the immigrant community is, and most of us are overwhelmingly grateful, right? And so look, for example, we talk about all the Eastern Europeans that came in the biggest wave of immigration to the UK. My guess is that Konstantin's family came from Eastern Europe at some point into the UK, right? But Konstantin's grateful, from what I've seen. I'm grateful for America, right? And I would tell those immigrants, especially in the UK where they're, for some magical reason, not allowed to work for a year, go to the local church, go to the local community and volunteer. Say, how can we help, right? And get to know people and get them to know you so that people are less alarmed, right? Now, at the same time, I want to say to the folks who are non-immigrants, don't do the demagoguing, right? So on crime, for example, here in America, unfortunately, natural-born citizens are twice as likely to commit crime as undocumented immigrants and 4 times more likely to commit crime than legal immigrants like myself and my family, right? So that doesn't mean that natural-born Americans are somehow worse. It's just these are all different geopolitical, social, and cultural contexts that leads to those numbers. But are immigrants in the U.S. more likely to do crime? No, they're actually less likely to do crime. So let's be honest about that, and let's be clear about that. So we don't need to demagogue over that. And then in terms of what Tatum said earlier, look, there is no amnesty here. There is no plan for amnesty. If there was a plan for amnesty, why didn't Obama do it? Why didn't Biden do it? The last time we had amnesty was actually under Ronald Reagan. Right. No, they didn't, actually, brother. And so,
the DACA
and right
program
now,
was
the mass deportations, no. And they don't vote. There's all these demagoguing about, oh my God, they're all going to vote. They're all coming. No, they don't have citizenship and they can't vote. So look, last thing on this is in terms of how it's going so far in America, you were right in your beginning, Piers. No question that people like the closing of the border and they like kicking out the criminals who are undocumented. And that's super rational. Now almost no one on the left objects to that, right? So the part where we begin to disagree is the mass deportations. Right. Not begin, we definitely disagree. And by the way, their independents are on our side, saying, don't do the mass deportations. They're ugly. They're not the right way to go. As we see with so many immigrants in other countries, as I said before, Canada, Switzerland, et cetera, it isn't the number of immigrants you have, it's the system you have. Do you have the right system? Do you assimilate them well? Do they assimilate well? Are they contributing to this society? So while Syrians might be a problem in some perceived ways because of the crowding issues and the economic issues in Germany and in Turkey, Steve Jobs' dad was a Muslim Syrian immigrant, and it led to Steve Jobs, which led to Apple. Elon Musk is an immigrant. So obviously immigrants can make massive, massive contributions, and that is why America is the #1 country in the world, because we're the most open to immigrants.
The discussion covered everything. People being scared of change, governments failing their citizens, immigrants working more while receiving less, native-born citizens committing more crime, politicians using fear for votes, and the public being fed panic instead of facts. One side says migration is a threat. The other fires back, that's a myth. Look at the data. And that's where the collision happened. Not because of fact, but because nobody wants to admit they might be wrong. And because the entire system survives by keeping people frightened and divided.
I mean, obviously, let me just repeat my favourite comment at this stage of these debates, which is that the biggest deporter in American presidential history per year that he was in office was Barack Obama, who deported over 3 million people in 8 years. He was known as deporter-in-chief in Mexico. He was the biggest mass deporter of them all. The only difference is the liberal world didn't care. If I asked any of my liberal friends in the last few years how many people did Obama deport, they had no idea. It never crossed their mind he might be a mass deporter. Everybody in Mexico knew how many he was deporting because it was on an industrial scale. So there's been a lot of hypocrisy politically about this. And I would say in the UK that the cross-party reality is they've all cocked this up, all of them. None of them have worked out how to stop 60,000 or so people coming over illegally on the small boats. They've tried everything from threatening to send them to Rwanda to all sorts of different ploys. None of them have worked. We've now got this gigantic backlog, which is ridiculous. Obviously, a lot of the people claiming asylum are not actually asylum seekers. We know that. Most of them are young male economic migrants trying it on. But, as Officer Tatum, Ronald Reagan said so rightly, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. That's the whole point of a border is to protect your border so you are a country. And I do think one of the issues we haven't really touched on, but if you look at Europe, for example, in the last decade, because of various wars led by Syria and others, the number of people that have come across the European continent has been, I think, 7-8 million was the last number I read in just a few years. It's an enormous number of people. You've not really seen this since the end of the Second World War. And that has, and this is the other part of the debate I think we should just touch on, that has a real-time sea change effect on the social fabric of a country, right? So if you look at someone like the UK, for example, if you look at the demographic of what we were like back in the start of last century, predominantly white Christian country, vast majority of people. Now it's a far less white country by comparison. It's a far less Christian country. A lot of that down to actually people not having any religious beliefs, but also we have a lot of Muslims in the UK, 4 million, about the same as they have in America. In America, you have about the same number of Jews, for example. In the UK, we have just 250,000 Jews, which is why I think there's been more of a flashpoint between the Muslim community and the Jewish community, because the Muslim community outnumbers the Jewish community many, many times comparative to America. Now, the point of saying this is just that these are statistical facts. And I was having a debate with Tucker Carlson, which is going on his show later today, in which we were talking about it. He thinks this is a really bad thing. I was defending it, saying the UK in particular, like America, has always been an extraordinary melting pot of cultures and faiths and skin colours and everything else. And I like that. I live in a high street in West London. I walk down pretty much every store, every service place, every hotel, every restaurant has a multicultural staff. I like it. Right? I've got no problem with it. But are we creating a problem in 20 years' time if we carry on down this route? Does it matter? Do you stop being England, for example? It's just what Tucker Carlson was arguing. I argue strenuously, no, we don't. But there's no doubt the country will look very different in 50 years' time to what it did 50 years ago.
Yeah, Pierce, I think there's a big difference, and we got to delineate between the two. There's a difference between immigration and illegal immigration. The people that are coming out to our country illegally are committing a crime. If you come into our country and you sneak past the port of entry and you go up under a fence, you committed a crime. You should be prosecuted for that crime. The fact that we let it go on so long is the reason why it's been exacerbated. And if a person comes into the country and they seek asylum and they lied or they didn't show up to court, they should be deported. That's according to the law that we have on the books. And let's go beyond that. I do push back on this idea that because America is less white, somehow it's going to be less American. America is not a race, it's an idea. So the people that come over here,
that's what I believe. Just to be clear,
Well,
but Tucker
any
Carlson
sane
and
person-
people like him, they get very nationalistic about this, right? And they say that
Well,
that culturally, if you invite too many people from other cultures into your country, that you lose your own identity and culture as a country. What do you say to that argument?
Well, Pierce, I think that sane people understand that it's not about color, it's about assimilation. There is no difference between an American that is black and an American that is white because we both believe in American values. What happens is when you start getting people into this country that do not make a vow to assimilate to American values and our Constitution and our way of life, that's where the problem happens. And unfortunately, one of the closest countries to us is Mexico and South America. And so a lot of people are coming over that just so happen to be of that demographic, and they're not abiding by the American values, and that's why you see a color change. But if everybody that we allow to come over here, like many immigrants that have come over here and that have contributed tremendously to the success of America, Elon Musk being one of them and a lot of others, because they do what? Assimilate. They believe in American values. They believe in the capitalism. They're not coming over here to be socialists and communists. They're not coming over here to weaponize empathy to try to create the world to be a new way of life. Like we see these mind-dead congressmen or congresswomen that have literally said that they want to rewrite American values. They want to get rid of the Constitution. I mean, these things are an apparel or are negative to the American
I mean, the
culture
Constitution,
and our way
the
forward.
Constitution.
If it sounded like there was more shouting than thinking in this debate, you're not alone. We've heard the same narrative for 20 years, and the answer is always the same. Blame the other side. But what do you think? Is the real problem immigration itself, or a government that thrives on chaos and fear? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let the people speak this time, not just the guests in the studio.